Hey, what's going on? Ryan here with Intersection Records, and we are talking progressive English rock legends, Jethro Tull, today. A little short history. Um, this band is formed really around a main songwriter, Ian Anderson, and he's the only consistent member of this band that's still uh, in the band. He was on all records, and he is from Scotland. He moved in 1960 to England, to the Blackpool area, where he was at grammar school with John Evan and Jeffrey Hammond. They did some bands together. They played as a trio. Ultimately, in 1964, the John Evan Band was what they were called. Barrymore Barlow enters the drum chair at that point. He would later come back into the fold in the mid-70s. They start playing the Marquee Club around 1967, which is a big, famous rock venue in London. Mick Abrams joins in on guitar, and they're having trouble keeping gigs, so they change their band names often. Here's an early lineup. This is the Aqualung lineup with Evan, Hammonds, Barr, Anderson, and Clive Bunker. They changed their name quite a few times. Navy Blue, Bag o' Nails, Candy Colored Rain. Finally settling in 1967 on band name Jethro Tull, who is an agriculturalist from the 18th century. And they finally, in 1968, come out with their first record, again with Mick Abrams on lead guitar. This is a good record. Obviously, like a lot of bands' first albums, it's not fully realized yet. The guitar playing of Abrams, isn't that signature Tull sound, but it's certainly not a bad record. He leaves the band after that first record. Abrams is briefly replaced by Tony Iommi. In fact, if you watch the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus show, Iommi is on guitar. I think he's only in the band for like 3 or 4 weeks, really just to fill in for that gig, and at which point Martin Barr replaces Tony Iommi, and you have the first kind of classic lineup. Clive Bunker, Glenn Cornick on bass, Anderson, and Martin Barr. They put their second album, Stand Up, out in 1969. And this really is kind of where you're getting some of your, look at this, Stand Up. This is more that blues rock, flute laden. Ian Anderson plays lead flute. He's a great guitar player as well, but he said, you know what? I could be a second rate Eric Clapton. I could be another guy following in the footsteps of these British greats. Why don't I do something unique? And why don't I play flute? It hasn't really been done in rock music. And again, this record is a fantastic representation of their early period. One man that was considered to replace Abrams was Mick Taylor. He did not get the gig, and Martin Barr, of course, is hired. And Stand Up comes out in July of 69. A New Day Yesterday, Fat Man are great classics off of that record. 1970 finds them, though, with Benefit. And if they have a first masterpiece, I would say, this is one of the great records of Jethro Tull. Nothing to Say, Inside, A Cry, To Cry You a Song, Teacher, Playing Time. This is an album, again, written by Ian Anderson and highly recommended material. Again, we're talking lineup changes with this band, and for the Aqualung album, in steps Jeffrey Hammond, gonna replace Glenn on bass. John Evans now in the band as well. Some of the benefit tour features John Evan on keyboards. You'll see video from live at Tanglewood 1970, which I can only recommend so much. It is fantastic. Here's the inside of Aqualung. Isn't that cool? Ian Anderson was asked, is this a concept record? Of course, he says, no, it's not a concept record. Well, it sure kind of feels like one. In response to whether that's a concept record, what do they do next? Is they do the ultimate concept record, Thick as a Brick. Clive Bunker has now quit the band to start a family. In steps their childhood friend or their grammar school friend, Barry Barlow, or as he can be referred to as Barrymore Barlow. And again, we have yet another fantastic lineup. Again, Hammond has replaced Glenn Cornick. We are now dealing with the Thick of a Brick lineup, which is a band that would stay together for some time. So, Thick as a Brick is released in March of '72, and it comes in a 12-page newspaper with fake articles that were all written by the band, and primarily, by Ian Anderson. So now we have John Evan, Martin Barr, Ian Anderson, Barrymore Barlow, and Jeffrey Hammond, or Jeffrey Hammonds, on bass. Again, a 12-page newspaper about a fictitious stories, musical adaptation of an epic poem by fictitious 8-year-old genius boy Gerald Bostock. So the concept of this record was that this boy had written a poem and it was put to music by Jethro Tull. Well, of course, Ian Anderson tells this tale, and it's basically just 2 songs. It's side 1 is part 1, side 2 is part 2, and again, you're talking, look at these stories. These are just all made up newspaper stories. This is prog rock genius. Again, answers whether Aqualung was a concept record with the ultimate concept record, and we're really getting into progressive rock here. Prior to this, it's more of a blues band, kind of a heavier blues. Moving on from Thick as a Brick, we have Passion Play in '73. This is fantastic. Yet another concept record. Passion Play is a concept, a spiritual journey about a deceased man, Ronnie Pilgrim, and fights of good and evil. At which point War Child comes out in '74. Bungle in the Jungle, Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day. Just classic Jethro Tull. Minstrel in the Gallery comes next. And this, again, these are just wonderful, wonderful records. This will be the last to feature Jeffrey Hammond before he leaves the band. And in fact, John Glasscock comes aboard for Too Old to Rock and Roll, yet another concept record about an aging rock star who's dealing with fame. And is Ian Anderson that aging rock star dealing with fame? He says it's not, but of course, it could be said that he is that. Again, now we have Glasscock in from the band Carmen. Richie Blackmore says that John Glasscock is the best bass player in the rock genre. He says that in a 1978 interview. And he really is fantastic on these records. He plays on Too Old to Rock and Roll. He plays on Heavy Horses. He plays on Stormwatcher. And he plays on the fantastic live album Bursting Out, which is just tremendous. Again, there's the band from this period. This is an amazing, amazing record from the Heavy Horses tour. You absolutely have to get this. This is essential Tull in my book. You know, it's from the Heavy Horses tour. There's a few songs off of that. You know, Song from the Wood, of course, is a classic period Tull album, as well as Heavy Horses, and then Stormwatcher. You know, John Glasscock's partying quite a bit. He has a valve issue in his heart, a defective valve issue in his heart. And, you know, he's partying, smoking weed, drinking heavily, and he ends up dying in November of 1979, which really kind of ends the classic period of Jethro Tull. They're on the Stormwatcher tour. You know, while he's having his health problems, Ian Anderson kind of puts him on a paid leave. David Pegg fills in on bass. And when Glasscock passes away in November of 79, you know, Barrymore Barlow is so devastated because he's lost his best friend. He quits the band. John Evan has now quit the band. And really, the band goes back just to the Martin Barr, Ian Anderson, and they are kind of pushed into creating a new lineup. Ian Anderson wants to do a 1980 solo album, but the record company's on him to make it a Jethro Tull album. And you do, you know, they come out with A in 1980. You know, they have in 87 they come out with Crest of a Knave, which wins a Grammy, famously for beating out, in the heavy metal category, beating out Injustice for All. Catfish Rises comes out in 91. That's when I first saw the band with Martin Barr and David Pegg. You know, Perry's on drums at this point, Doane Perry. You know, really ultimately, Roots and Branches comes out in 95. JethroTull.com comes out in 1999. And then finally, in 2003, they do their last album with Martin Barr, which is a Christmas record. It's also Perry's last album on drums. And really, the band goes into hiatus for a number of years. Ian Anderson does a couple solo albums. He ultimately reboots the band as Jethro Tull, I think in 2017. And in 2022, they put out a very well-received, critically acclaimed album called The Zealot Gene. You know, it's a return to form. They do some shows. The lineup now from the most recent record that just came out this week, Rock Float, is fantastic. We have Joe Parrish James on guitar, David Goodyear on bass, Scott Hammond on drums, and John O'Hare on keys, who's been in the band, I think, since 07. You know, this is a great record. You know, this is a band, again, around the mastermind of Ian Anderson. You know, Ian Anderson, you know, was a guy that was always serious about his business. He did not, to my knowledge, you know, partake in the partying that a lot of his contemporaries did. You know, with his money in the late 80s, he purchases 15,000 acres on the Scottish coastline where he raises sheep and farm raises salmon. He's one of the biggest salmon farmer producers in the world, and really just a great songwriter. You know, it sucks that Martin Barr is no longer in the band. Martin Barr has his own project. In fact, he did some work with Clive Bunker on recent tours with D. Palmer, formerly David Palmer. And by the way, David Palmer does some orchestral stuff and piano on quite a bit of those 70s records that we just talked about. He pops up periodically throughout their career, and certainly in the 70s, I think all the way up through Stormwatch. Check out my channel, subscribe to my channel. Want to thank everybody that's subscribed lately. Check out Jethro Tull. Peace out. We'll talk later.